The hushed whispers of anticipation filled the pristine halls of Riverdale Academy as students filed into room 405 of the Advanced Sciences wing. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the immaculate laboratory tables. For most 8th graders, Dr. Palmer's advanced chemistry class was the most dreaded period of the day. Even the brightest students found themselves shrinking under her scrutinizing gaze. In the back corner of the room, Emily Chen sat, quietly, her dark hair falling forward like a protective curtain as she hunched over her notebook. At 14, she had mastered the art of invisibility, a skill born not from fear, but from years of careful observation. Her worn notebook told a different story than its pristine cover suggested. Between meticulous class notes, its margins, overflowed with complex chemical equations and molecular structures far beyond 8th grade level. It was her sanctuary, a place where her true passion for science could exist without judgment. Dr. Victoria Palmer swept into the classroom, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. At 45, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had dedicated their life to academic excellence. Her Harvard PhD hung prominently by the door, a daily reminder to her students of the standards she expected. She was known throughout Riverdale Academy for her brilliance, but also for her cutting remarks and unyielding expectations. Today, Dr. Palmer announced, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses, we'll see who has actually been paying attention this semester. Her voice carried the weight of years spent in prestigious research labs before choosing to teach at Boston's most elite private school. Though based on your last round of lab reports, I'm not particularly optimistic. Emily's fingers tightened around her pencil, but her expression remained neutral. She had scored perfectly on every assignment, yet Dr. Palmer had never once acknowledged her work. Instead, the teacher seemed to look right through her, as if Emily were as transparent as the beakers lining the laboratory shelves. Dr. Palmer began writing a complex organic chemistry equation on the smartboard, her movements precise and deliberate. The class watched in growing dread as the formula grew more complicated with each stroke. This wasn't 8th grade chemistry. This was college level at least. Emily's heart quickened as she recognized the structure taking shape. She had been studying this exact type of reaction in her father's old university textbooks, fascinated by the elegant complexity of organic synthesis. Since none of you seem interested in volunteering, Dr. Palmer's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel, perhaps we should hear from... Her eyes scanned the room, landing with predatory precision on Emily. Miss Chen, you're always so quiet back there. Let's see if you've been doing more than just taking up space in my classroom. The silence that followed was deafening. 23. Heads turned to stare at Emily, a mix of pity and relief in their eyes. Even Grace Martinez, Emily's best friend, winced in sympathy from across the room. They had all seen Dr. Palmer's public demonstrations before. Carefully orchestrated moments designed to prove her intellectual superiority over her students. But what no one knew, not even Grace, was that Emily's silence wasn't born of ignorance. Every night, after finishing her regular homework, she would lose herself in advanced chemistry textbooks, online lectures from MIT OpenCourseWare, and chemistry forums where she discussed complex reactions under an anonymous username. Her father's position as a research scientist at Massachusetts General Hospital meant their home was filled with academic journals and reference materials that Emily devoured like other kids binged Netflix shows. Dr. Palmer's smirk grew as Emily remained frozen in her seat. We're waiting, Miss Chen. Surely you can at least attempt to explain the first step of this synthesis pathway, or have you been too busy daydreaming to learn even the basics? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Emily slowly stood, her chair scraping against the floor in the silent room. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her mind was already racing ahead, breaking down the complex equation into its component parts. Years of self-study crystallized into perfect clarity as she walked to the front of the room, each step echoing in the tensed silence. Dr. Palmer held out a marker, her expression a mixture of condescension and impatience. "Any day now, Miss Chen. Some of us would like to move on to students who actually take their education seriously." Emily accepted the marker, its weight familiar in her hand. She had practiced similar problems countless times in her notebook, but always in secret, always alone. Now, standing before the class, something shifted inside her. The fear of attention, of standing out, began to fade against a stronger current. The pure joy of chemistry, of understanding how molecules danced and transformed. The tension in room 405 crackled like static electricity before a storm. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the scraping of chair legs against linoleum cutting through the heavy silence. Dr. Palmer's pristine lab coat seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights as she crossed her arms, watching Emily with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly disappointing experiment. Through the large windows, the Boston skyline stretched against a steel-gray spring sky, but inside the classroom, time seemed to stand still. The smartboard's soft electronic hum provided an eerie backdrop to the unfolding drama. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she uncapped the marker, its chemical scent sharp in her nostrils. "Enlighten us, Miss Chen." Dr. Palmer's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Show us how much attention you've been paying while hiding behind that curtain of hair." A few nervous laughs rippled through the room, quickly silenced by the intensity of the moment. Grace Martinez, seated in the front row, caught Emily's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. But even Grace didn't know about the hours Emily spent in her father's home laboratory, carefully replicating basic experiments under his supervision. She didn't know about the complex molecular models Emily built in her spare time, or the advanced chemistry symposium videos she watched late into the night. Dr. Palmer began to pace, her heels marking time like a metronome. "This synthesis pathway," she gestured to the board with theatrical flourish, "is something my undergraduate students at Harvard often struggled with. I don't expect you to solve it, Miss Chen. I merely want to demonstrate the importance of active participation in class discussions." Emily's gaze swept over the equation, taking in every bond, every electron transfer. The pathway was complex, yes, but there was a beautiful logic to it. Like a puzzle where each piece had its perfect place, each step leading inevitably to the next. Her breathing steadied as the familiar patterns emerged. The class watched in collective anticipation as Emily raised the marker to the board. Sarah Williams, known for her perfect grades and constant participation, leaned forward in her seat, phone discreetly positioned to record what she assumed would be an epic academic failure. Ryan Cooper, the class clown, had for once dropped, his perpetual smirk caught up in the dramatic tension. "Any time this century, Miss Chen," Dr. Palmer's voice cut through Emily's concentration. "Or shall we just accept that you're as unprepared as usual and move on to someone who might actually contribute to the class?" The words stung, but they also sparked something in Emily. Years of being overlooked, of carefully maintaining her invisibility, suddenly felt less like protection and more like a cage. Her father's words from years ago echoed in her mind. Science isn't about who you are or where you come from. It's about understanding the truth of how things work. The smartboard's surface was smooth under her hand as she began to write. The first step of the synthesis was like an old friend, familiar and comforting. Emily's strokes were precise, each symbol and arrow placed with careful deliberation. The rustle of paper and whispered commentary faded into background noise as she lost herself in the elegant dance of molecular transformation. Dr. Palmer's pacing slowed, then stopped entirely. The confidence in her posture flickered as Emily moved smoothly from one step to the next, adding detailed mechanistic arrows and electron movements that weren't even part of the original problem. The classroom's atmosphere shifted, tension giving way to something else. Disbelief, then growing amazement. "That's not possible," Dr. Palmer muttered, more to herself than the class. "Those mechanisms aren't covered until advanced organic chemistry." Her voice grew louder, sharp with accusation. "Miss Chen, did you copy this from somewhere? Have you somehow seen this problem before?" Emily paused, marker hovering over the board. Without turning around, she spoke softly but clearly. "No, Dr. Palmer, but the electron movement in this step follows the same principles as the Diels-Alder reaction we covered last week. The stereochemistry is different, but the underlying mechanism is similar." The silence that followed was profound. Even the usual background noise of the school seemed muted, as if the whole building was holding its breath. Dr. Palmer stepped closer to the board, her eyes darting between Emily's work and the original problem. Grace's face broke into a wide smile as she watched her quiet friend command the room's attention.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Other students began to lean forward, phones forgotten, as they witnessed the transformation of their invisible classmate into someone entirely new. Emily continued writing, adding textbook-perfect curved arrows to show electron movement. Her mind was clear now, focused entirely on the elegant chemical choreography taking place under her marker. She added notes in small, neat handwriting, explaining each step's activation energy requirements and stereochemical considerations. Dr. Palmer's lips pressed into a thin line as she watched Emily work. The teacher's carefully constructed image of authority was cracking like ice in spring, as her student demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond the prescribed curriculum. The original equation had been meant as a tool of humiliation, a way to put a quiet student in her place. Instead, it had become a spotlight, illuminating something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. Emily's hand moved steadily across the board, each stroke adding to the growing evidence of her expertise. "The final product," Emily said, her voice growing stronger, "can exist as 4 possible stereoisomers due to the new chiral centers created during the reaction." She drew all 4 structures, then added a note about their relative stability based on steric hindrance. Dr. Palmer stepped back, bumping into her desk. The sound of shuffling papers broke the spell that had fallen over the classroom. Students, who had been holding their breath, released them in collective gasps and whispers. Sarah Williams's phone dropped to her desk with a clatter, forgotten in the moment of revelation. The morning sun had shifted, casting new shadows across the laboratory tables, the same room that had felt like an arena of potential humiliation. Just minutes before now, hummed with a different energy. Emily replaced the marker cap with a soft click that seemed to echo in the charged atmosphere. Ryan Cooper was the first to break the silence. "Holy crap," he whispered, genuine awe replacing his usual sarcasm. That was like beautiful mind-level stuff. Dr. Palmer cleared her throat, trying to regain control of her classroom. "Miss Chen," she began, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "where did you learn about advanced stereochemistry and reaction mechanisms?" Emily turned to face her teacher, standing straight for perhaps the first time in her years at Riverdale Academy. "I study at home," she said simply. "My father has a lot of chemistry books and—" She paused, gathering courage. "I love understanding how molecules interact. It's like solving puzzles, but the puzzles explain how our whole world works." The bell rang, startling everyone. Nobody moved. Dr. Palmer's carefully maintained facade of superiority had crumbled, revealing something almost vulnerable beneath. She stared at the board, then at Emily, as if seeing her student for the first time. "Class dismissed," Dr. Palmer said finally, her voice quiet. "Miss Chen, please stay behind." As students began to pack up their things, the room filled with excited chatter. Emily could feel their eyes on her, their perception shifting like a chemical reaction, reaching equilibrium. Grace gave her a thumbs up as she left, mouthing, "You're amazing!" silently across the room. Emily stood by her desk, heart still racing, but chin held high. The morning's events had changed something fundamental, like a catalyst accelerating a reaction that could never be reversed. Through the windows, she could see spring clouds gathering over Boston, promising change in the air. Dr. Palmer remained by her desk, absently straightening papers as the last students filed out. The click of the closing door echoed in the now empty classroom, leaving teacher and student to face the aftermath of their unexpected confrontation. The emptied classroom felt larger somehow, the distance between Emily and Dr. Palmer's desk, stretching like an infinite molecular chain. The smartboard still displayed Emily's precise work, the complex chemical equations, a testament to what had just transpired. Outside, the gathering clouds had darkened, casting the laboratory in a strange, ethereal light that made the gleaming equipment seem almost otherworldly. Dr. Palmer sat at her desk, removing her glasses and placing them carefully beside her gradebook. For a moment, she simply stared at the equations Emily had written, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shifting paradigms. "Tell me, Miss Chen," Dr. Palmer finally spoke, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Why have you been hiding this level of understanding?" She gestured toward the board, where Emily's detailed mechanisms and stereochemical analysis still glowed in digital perfection. Emily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The familiar urge to disappear, to blend into the background, warred with a new feeling, pride in her knowledge, in her passion for chemistry. Through the windows, she could see the Massachusetts General Hospital building where her father worked, its distinctive shape a reminder of countless evening discussions about molecular structures and reaction pathways. "I didn't want to stand out," Emily began, her voice soft but steady. "At my old school before we moved to Boston, being different wasn't." She paused, searching for the right words. "It wasn't always safe." Dr. Palmer's expression shifted, a flicker of understanding crossing her features. She stood, walking, to the window where rain had begun to fall, each drop creating perfect circles on the glass. "You know," she said almost to herself, "I was the only female chemistry student in my graduate program at Harvard." Emily watched as her teacher traced a raindrop's path down the window with her finger. The gesture seemed surprisingly human, coming from someone who had always appeared so coldly professional. "They didn't expect much from me either," Dr. Palmer continued, turning back to face Emily. "Perhaps that's why She trailed off, then straightened her lab coat with a sharp tug. "Well, let's just say I learned to be tough, to prove myself constantly." The rain intensified outside, creating a soft percussion that filled the silence between them. Emily thought about her own experiences, the careful balance she had maintained between her passion for chemistry and her desire to remain unnoticed. She thought about the complex equations she solved late at night, the molecular models she built in secret, the questions she never asked in class despite knowing the answers. But this, Dr. Palmer gestured toward the board again, this level of understanding, you've gone far beyond the curriculum. Those mechanisms you drew, they're university level at least. And your analysis of the stereochemistry, shook her head, a mix of admiration and something else, regret perhaps, crossing her face. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Chemistry makes sense to me," she said, her voice growing stronger. "It's like reading music or solving puzzles. Each reaction tells a story, and once you understand the basic principles, you can predict what will happen next. It's beautiful." A small smile tugged at Dr. Palmer's lips, the first genuine one Emily had ever seen from her. "Beautiful," she repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose it is. I used to think that way too before." She walked back to her desk, pulling out a drawer and removing a worn journal. Before teaching became more about maintaining standards and less about fostering understanding. The journal's cover was faded, its edges soft with use. Dr. Palmer opened it carefully, revealing pages dense with handwritten notes and chemical structures. "This was my research journal from graduate school," she explained, turning it so Emily could see. "I was working on novel synthetic pathways for anti-cancer compounds." Emily stepped closer, drawn by the familiar language of chemistry that filled the pages. The equations and mechanisms were complex, but she could follow them, could see the elegant logic behind each step. Her eyes widened as she recognized some of the same principles she had just demonstrated on the board. "You see it, don't you?" Dr. Palmer asked, watching Emily's face closely. "The beauty in the complexity, the way each reaction builds on fundamental principles to create something new." Emily nodded, her eyes still scanning the journal's pages. "This intermediate structure," she pointed to a particularly complex molecule, "it's similar to the one we just worked with, isn't it? The stereochemistry at these carbon centers." "Yes," Dr. Palmer interrupted, surprise evident in her voice. "Yes, exactly. The spatial arrangement of those groups is crucial for the molecule's biological activity." She paused, studying Emily with new eyes. "You truly understand this, don't you? This isn't just memorization or showing off. You actually see the connections." The rain continued to fall outside, creating a cocoon of sound around them. The harsh fluorescent lights reflected off the laboratory equipment, casting complex shadows that danced across the walls. In this moment, teacher and student stood on equal ground, united by their shared appreciation for the fundamental laws that governed molecular behavior. Dr. Palmer closed the journal carefully, her movements deliberate. "I owe you an apology, Miss Chen," she said, her voice carrying a weight of sincerity that transformed her usually stern demeanor. "I made assumptions about you based on your silence, your reluctance to participate. I interpreted your behavior as disinterest or inability, when in fact, Emily finished quietly, "I was just trying not to draw attention to myself." "Yes," Dr. Palmer agreed, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair in an uncharacteristically human gesture. "And in doing so, I became exactly the kind of teacher I swore I would never be when I started this career. I used my position to try to intimidate rather than educate." Thunder rolled in the distance, a low rumble that seemed to emphasize the gravity of the moment. Emily watched as Dr. Palmer returned the journal to her desk drawer, noting how her teacher's usually rigid posture had softened somewhat. "Do you know about the Advanced Chemical Research Program?" Dr. Palmer asked suddenly, turning back to Emily. "It's usually reserved for juniors and seniors, but given what I've seen today..." She gestured toward the smartboard, where Emily's work still glowed like a beacon of unexpected brilliance. Emily shook her head, heart beginning to race with possibility. She had heard whispers about the program, how it gave students access to real laboratory equipment, how they could design and conduct their own experiments under proper supervision. "Well," Dr. Palmer continued, a new energy entering her voice, "I think it's time we made an exception. Your understanding of organic chemistry mechanisms is already beyond what most high school students achieve, with proper guidance and resources." She paused, considering. Would you be interested in developing your own research project? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with potential. Emily thought about all the ideas she had scribbled in her notebook margins, the questions about molecular behavior that kept her awake at night, the theories she had never dared to voice aloud. Emily started, then stopped, gathering her thoughts. Yes, she said finally, her voice firm. Yes, I would like that very much. Dr. Palmer nodded, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. Good. We'll need to speak with your parents. Of course. And there will be additional safety training required before you can work in the advanced lab. But I think... She paused, looking at Emily with new respect. I think you might surprise us all with what you can achieve when you're not trying to hide your light. The rain had begun to ease outside, sunlight breaking through the clouds to create rainbow refractions through the laboratory glassware. Emily stood straighter, feeling as if a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. Thank you, she said simply, meaning it for more than just the opportunity being offered. Dr. Palmer picked up her glasses, putting them back on with practiced precision. Don't thank me yet, Miss Chen, she said, but there was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. I expect this is just the beginning of what you're capable of showing us. As if on cue, the warning bell for the next period rang, its sharp tone breaking the moment. Emily gathered her belongings, feeling different somehow, as if the equation of her life had been irreversibly altered, creating something new and unexpected. Oh, and Miss Chen? Dr. Palmer called as Emily reached the door. I expect to see more active participation in class from now on. No more hiding in the back row. Emily turned back, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Yes, Dr. Palmer, she replied, then added with newfound confidence, I have quite a few questions about last week's discussion of catalyst mechanisms, actually. Dr. Palmer's answering smile was genuine, the stern mask of authority completely gone. I look forward to hearing them. And Emily? The use of her first name made Emily pause. Sometimes, the most important reactions are the ones that change us as people. With that, Emily stepped into the hallway, already crowded with students rushing to their next classes. But she felt different now. Visible, but no longer afraid of being seen. The complex equations she had drawn still glowed on the smartboard behind her, a testament to the moment when everything had changed. In the teacher's lounge later that day, other faculty members would notice a change in Dr. Palmer as well, a softening around the edges, a thoughtful expression replacing her usual stern demeanor. She spent her free period reviewing her lesson, plans, making notes about engagement strategies, and the importance of looking beyond the surface. Sometimes, she realized, the most valuable lessons in a classroom aren't found in any textbook. They're discovered in the moments when we're brave enough to challenge our assumptions, when we allow ourselves to see beyond our preconceptions, and when we remember why we fell in love with our subjects in the first place. The news of Emily's unexpected brilliance spread through Riverdale Academy like an exothermic reaction, releasing waves of excitement and disbelief through the hallways. By lunch period, the story had evolved with each retelling, growing more elaborate with each passing hour. Students who had never noticed Emily before now watched her with undisguised curiosity as she made her way through the crowded cafeteria. Grace Martinez had already secured their usual table in the corner, practically bouncing in her seat as Emily approached. The cafeteria's large windows offered a panoramic view of Boston's skyline, now bathed in post-storm sunlight that made the wet buildings glisten like freshly cleaned laboratory glass. "Em, you're basically famous," Grace exclaimed, as Emily set down her lunch tray. Sarah Williams posted about what happened in chemistry on her Instagram story, and now everyone's talking about it. Even the seniors are impressed. Emily ducked her head, her cheeks warming. The familiar urge to disappear warred with a new feeling, a growing sense that perhaps being seen wasn't as terrifying as she'd always believed. The weight of her advanced chemistry textbook in her backpack felt different now, like a badge of honor rather than a secret to be hidden. "It's not that big a deal," Emily murmured, arranging her lunch with careful precision. But even as she spoke, she could feel the energy in the cafeteria shift as other students glanced their way, whispering behind their hands. "Not a big deal." Grace leaned forward, her voice dropping to an excited whisper. You just showed up Dr. Palmer. The same Dr. Palmer who made Jason Curtis cry last semester over balancing equations. This is legendary." Before Emily could respond, Ryan Cooper appeared at their table, his usual cocky grin replaced by something that looked suspiciously like respect. "Hey, Chen," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "That thing you did in chemistry, with all those arrows and stuff? That was pretty intense." Emily looked up, surprised to find genuine interest in Ryan's expression. For 3 years, he had barely acknowledged her existence, and now here he was, initiating conversation. "Thanks," she managed, her fingers automatically reaching for the comfort of her notebook's worn edges. "Listen," Ryan continued, running, a hand through his carefully disheveled hair. "Some of us are having trouble with the upcoming lab report. I know this is kind of weird, but would you maybe consider helping us study? Like form a study group or something?" The request hung in the air, heavy with implications. Emily glanced at Grace, who was trying and failing to hide her grin. 3 years of carefully maintained invisibility were crumbling around her, and, surprisingly, it didn't feel like the disaster she had always imagined. Emily started, then paused, remembering Dr. Palmer's words about not hiding anymore. "Sure," she said finally, her voice growing stronger. "We could meet in the library after school. I can explain the reaction mechanisms if you want." Ryan's face lit up with relief. "Really? That would be awesome. I'll tell the others. Maybe we could make it a regular thing." He hurried off before Emily could respond, already pulling out his phone to spread the word. Grace reached across the table to squeeze Emily's hand. "Look at you, coming out of your shell. Your parents are going to be so proud when they hear about all this." The mention of her parents made Emily's stomach flutter. She hadn't told them about the morning's events yet, or about Dr. Palmer's offer to join the advanced chemical research program. Her father, with his precise mind and gentle encouragement, would be thrilled. Her mother, who had always worried about Emily's tendency to isolate herself, would be relieved. A shadow fell across their table, and Emily looked up to find Sarah Williams standing there, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her phone. "Is it true?" Sarah asked without preamble. "Did Dr. Palmer really offer you a spot in the research program?" Emily nodded slowly, watching as Sarah's eyes widened. "But that's for upperclassmen," Sarah protested, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "They have to maintain a perfect GPA just to be considered." "Well," Grace interjected, protective, instinct flaring, "maybe they care more about actual understanding than just memorizing facts for tests." Sarah had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I didn't mean, She sighed, then squared her shoulders. "Look, what you did in class today. That was amazing. I recorded part of it because I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and now everyone's asking to see the video." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You recorded it?" "Yeah, here." Sarah held out her phone, showing Emily the screen. There she was, writing confidently on the board, explaining complex chemical concepts with a clarity that surprised even herself. The video had already garnered hundreds of views and dozens of comments from their schoolmates. "I can take it down if you want," Sarah offered, noticing Emily's expression. "But honestly, you should be proud. You made chemistry look like art up there." Before Emily could respond, the cafeteria doors burst open and Mr. Russell, the physics teacher, strode in. His bow tie was slightly askew, and his eyes scanned the room until they landed on Emily. A broad smile spread across his face as he made his way to their table. "Miss Chen!" he called out, drawing even more attention their way. "I just heard about your extraordinary demonstration in Dr. Palmer's class. Simply extraordinary. Tell me, have you ever considered joining the Science Olympiad team? We could certainly use someone with your understanding of molecular interactions." Emily felt the eyes of the entire cafeteria on her, but strangely, the attention didn't send her into a panic as it once would have. Instead, she felt a growing sense of possibility, as if doors she hadn't even known existed were suddenly opening all around her. "I hadn't really thought about it," she admitted, but even as she spoke, her mind was already racing with the potential challenges and opportunities such a competition might offer. Mr. Russell's enthusiasm was infectious. "Well, think about it. We meet Thursdays after school. Dr. Palmer mentioned you might be joining the research program as well. Outstanding, simply outstanding." As Mr. Russell continued to extol the virtues of competitive science, Emily caught sight of Dr. Palmer entering the cafeteria. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and the teacher gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of their earlier conversation, of barriers broken and assumptions challenged. The rest of lunch period passed in a whirlwind of conversations and possibilities. Students who had never spoken to Emily before stopped by their table, asking questions about chemistry or expressing admiration for her courage in standing up to Dr. Palmer. Each interaction chipped away at the walls Emily had built around herself, revealing a person even she hadn't fully known existed. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Emily gathered her things with a new sense of purpose. Her careful invisibility had been a shield, but it had also been a cage. Now, standing in the sunlight streaming through the cafeteria windows, she felt its constraints falling away. Grace linked arms with her as they headed to their next class. "You know what the best part of all this is?" she asked, grinning. "Everyone else is finally seeing what I've known all along, that you're absolutely brilliant." Emily smiled, adjusting her backpack with its precious cargo of advanced textbooks. "I'm still the same person," she said softly. "No," Grace corrected. "Her, you're not. You're finally letting yourself be who you really are, and it's about time." The afternoon classes flew by in a blur of excited whispers and stolen glances. Emily found herself sitting straighter in her desk, raising her hand to answer questions in other subjects, her voice growing stronger with each contribution. The fear of standing out, of being noticed, was still there, but it was muted now, overshadowed by something more powerful, the freedom to be herself. After school, Emily found herself in the library, surrounded by a small group of students, eager to understand the chemistry concepts that had always come so naturally to her. As she explained reaction mechanisms and drew molecular structures, she discovered something unexpected. She enjoyed teaching. There was a special kind of satisfaction in seeing understanding dawn in someone else's eyes, in helping them grasp concepts that had once seemed impossibly complex. Ryan Cooper, who had started the whole study group idea, proved to be a surprisingly engaged student. "So these electrons," he said, pointing to Emily's careful diagram, "they're like tiny dancers, right? Moving from partner to partner based on who's more attractive." Emily laughed, surprised by the apt metaphor. "That's actually not a bad way to think about it. The electrons are attracted to more electronegative atoms, just like..." She paused, then grinned. "Just like some people are attracted to confidence and knowledge instead of assumptions and stereotypes." The group looked at her with newfound appreciation. And Emily realized that she wasn't just teaching chemistry anymore. She was showing them, and herself, that people were capable of far more than others might assume. That sometimes the quietest person in the room might have the most to say, if only given the chance to speak. As the afternoon light slanted through the library windows, casting long shadows across their textbooks and notebooks, Emily felt a profound sense of transformation. Like a catalyst in a chemical reaction, one morning's challenge had accelerated. A change that had been waiting to happen all along. She was no longer the invisible girl in the back of the classroom. She was Emily Chen, chemistry enthusiast, potential science Olympiad team member, and mentor to her peers. And somewhere in room 405, Dr. Palmer was probably still staring at the complex equations on her smartboard, realizing that sometimes the most powerful lessons are the ones we learn from those we thought we were meant to teach. The late afternoon, sun cast long shadows across Emily's dining room table, where stacks of chemistry textbooks and notebooks created a miniature academic fortress. Her parents sat across from her, their expressions a mix of pride and amazement as she recounted the day's events. Her father's coffee had gone cold, forgotten in the excitement of Emily's story. And then Dr. Palmer offered me a spot in the advanced chemical research program, Emily concluded, her voice stronger and more confident than her parents had ever heard it. She said we could start working on an independent research project. Dr. James Chen removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully with the edge of his shirt, a habit Emily had inherited. "The same Dr. Palmer who you said never noticed you?" he asked, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The one you were so afraid of disappointing?" Michelle Chen reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "I always knew you had it in you, sweetheart. All that time you spent in your father's home lab, all those chemistry books you thought we didn't notice you reading under the covers at night." Emily blushed, realizing that her parents had been more observant than she'd given them credit. For the evening light filtering through the kitchen windows caught the molecular model kit on the counter, a birthday present from 3 years ago that she'd pretended was too advanced for her. Emily paused, organizing her thoughts like she would a complex reaction pathway. "I didn't want to be different. At my old school in California, being smart meant being alone. But today, when Dr. Palmer challenged me, something changed. It was like all those hours of studying in secret suddenly had a purpose." Her father nodded, understanding flooding his features. As a research scientist who had faced his own struggles as an immigrant in academia, he recognized the complexity of his daughter's journey. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the most important discoveries happen when we're forced out of our comfort zones." Michelle stood up, moving to the kitchen counter where she began preparing tea, a family ritual for important discussions. The familiar scent of jasmine filled the air as she spoke. "You know, Emily, I was worried about you always being so quiet, so determined to blend in. But watching you now, talking about chemistry with such passion." She smiled, setting 3 cups on the table. "This is who you were always meant to be." Emily wrapped her hands around the warm cup, inhaling the fragrant steam. "Dr. Palmer wants to meet with you both," she said, "to discuss the research program and maybe even some summer opportunities at the university." Her father's eyes lit up with excitement. "Summer research? At your age? That's extraordinary." He paused, studying his daughter's face. "But only if it's what you want, Emily. No pressure." Emily thought about the day's events, the equations flowing from her marker, the looks of amazement on her classmates' faces, the study group in the library, and most importantly, the feeling of finally being truly seen. "It is what I want," she said firmly. "I don't want to hide anymore." Michelle returned to the table, carrying a plate of almond cookies. "Then we'll support you every step of the way, just like we always have." She gave her daughter a knowing look. Though perhaps now we can move your late-night chemistry experiments from under the covers to the actual desk. They all laughed, the sound filling their cozy kitchen with warmth. Outside, the Boston skyline glittered in the fading light, the Massachusetts General Hospital building where her father worked standing proud against the darkening sky. Oh! Emily suddenly remembered something. Sarah Williams recorded part of my solution on the board today. She posted it online and she pulled out her phone, showing her parents the video that had now gone viral within the school community. Her father watched with undisguised pride as on-screen Emily confidently explained complex organic chemistry concepts. "Look at you," he murmured. "You remind me of my own professor at MIT, the one who convinced me to pursue research instead of medical practice. She had that same light in her eyes when she talked about molecular structures." Michelle leaned over to watch, her eyes glistening slightly. "Your grandmother would have been so proud," she said softly. "She always said education was the key to unlocking any door. She never had the chances you have, but she made sure I did." Emily felt the weight of generations of dreams and determination in her mother's words. Her grandmother had left China with nothing but hope for a better future, working countless hours to ensure her children could attend college. Now here was Emily, about to embark on advanced chemistry research while still in 8th grade. "I think," Emily said slowly, "that's part of why today felt so important. It wasn't just about proving something to Dr. Palmer or my classmates. It was about proving something to myself." Her father reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. "Emily, listen to me," he said, his voice serious. "Intelligence is a gift, but it's what you do with it that matters. Today, you chose to stop hiding your gift. That took more courage than solving any equation." The evening had deepened outside their windows, stars beginning to peek through the urban glow. Emily's phone buzzed with messages from her new study. Group members asking questions about tomorrow's chemistry homework. The familiar equations and molecular structures now felt like old friends she could finally introduce to the world. Michelle began clearing the teacups, humming softly, a Chinese lullaby she used to sing when Emily was small. "So," she said casually, "should we clear some space in the guest room for a proper study area? Maybe set up that old whiteboard your father brought home from the lab." Emily's face lit up at the suggestion. The guest room had better lighting than her bedroom, and the whiteboard would be perfect for working through complex mechanisms. "Could we?" she asked, excitement bubbling in her voice. "I could use it for the study group too, if that's okay." Her parents exchanged pleased glances. For years, they had watched their daughter withdraw into herself, building walls between her intelligence and the world. Now, in the span of a single day, those walls had begun to crumble. "Of course," her father said. "I'll bring home some molecular modeling software from the lab too. If you're going to be doing advanced research, you'll need proper tools." Emily jumped up to hug both her parents, nearly knocking over the remaining teacups in her enthusiasm. As they embraced her, she felt the last traces of her old fear melting away. Here, in the warmth of her family's support, being smart wasn't something to hide. It was something to celebrate. Later that night, as Emily sat at her desk, working on the next day's chemistry homework, she found herself adding detailed explanations in the margins, not just for herself this time, but for her study group. Her phone occasionally lit up with messages from classmates she'd never spoken to before, each one expressing gratitude for her help or admiration for her knowledge. The molecular model kit her parents had given her years ago now sat prominently on her desk, no longer hidden in its box. She picked up a carbon atom, connecting it to oxygen and hydrogen pieces, building the organic molecules that had once seemed so daunting to her classmates. Tomorrow, she would show them how these physical models could help them understand the three-dimensional nature of chemical bonds. As she worked, Emily thought about Dr. Palmer's words regarding the advanced chemical research program. The prospect of conducting her own experiments, of potentially contributing to real scientific knowledge, filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known before. The quiet girl who had hidden in the back of the classroom was transforming, like a molecule reaching a new energy state, into someone who could inspire others to see the beauty in chemical reactions. A message popped up on her phone. Grace sending her a goodnight text with about 50 exclamation points and chemistry-related emojis. Emily smiled, remembering her best friend's unwavering support even during her most invisible days. Grace had always seen her potential, even when she'd been determined to hide it. Through her window, Emily could see the lights of Boston twinkling like distant stars. Somewhere out there, other students might be struggling with their own fears of standing out, of being different. Maybe her story would help them find the courage to let their own lights shine. She turned back to her homework, adding one final note in the margin. Not an equation this time, but a reminder to herself. Being smart isn't just about knowing the answers. It's about having the courage to share them. 2 weeks had transformed room 405 into a different world. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated a classroom buzzing with energy, where students clustered around lab tables eagerly discussing molecular structures and reaction mechanisms. At the center of this transformation stood Emily Chen, confidently sketching electron movement arrows on a portable whiteboard, while her classmates leaned in, following every stroke with genuine interest. Dr. Palmer observed from her desk, a subtle smile playing at her lips as she watched Emily explain a particularly complex concept to Ryan Cooper, who was nodding with newfound understanding. The change in her classroom's dynamics was remarkable. Gone were the slouched shoulders and vacant stares, replaced by engaged discussions and thoughtful questions. So if we apply Le Chatelier's principle here, Emily was saying, her marker dancing across the whiteboard, we can predict how the equilibrium will shift when we change the concentration. She drew a series of arrows, her explanation clear and methodical. Ryan's face lit up with comprehension. Wait, so it's like a chemical balancing act? If we push one way, the reaction pushes back to maintain balance? Exactly, Emily beamed, her previous shyness replaced by genuine enthusiasm. For sharing knowledge. Think of it like a seesaw. If you add weight to one side, the other side has to adjust to compensate. Dr. Palmer stood, smoothing her lab coat as she addressed the class. Miss Chen's analogy is quite apt. In fact, I'd like everyone to consider how this principle might apply to our upcoming laboratory experiment. She paused, noting how her students straightened in their seats, eager to contribute. Perhaps Miss Chen would be willing to help demonstrate the practical applications. Emily nodded, no longer flinching at being the center of attention. The past 2 weeks had taught her that knowledge shared was knowledge strengthened. As she moved to the front of the room, she caught Dr. Palmer's approving glance. A far cry from the challenging stares of just weeks ago. The morning continued with a collaborative energy that seemed to fuel itself. Students who had once competed fiercely for grades now worked together, building on each other's understanding. Sarah Williams, previously known for her cutthroat academic approach, was earnestly helping a struggling classmate understand reaction kinetics. During a brief pause in the lesson, Dr. Palmer pulled Emily aside. "The department chair observed our class yesterday," she said quietly. "He was particularly impressed by the peer tutoring initiative you've developed. He's considering implementing something similar across all science classes." Emily adjusted her safety goggles, a gesture that had become more confident than nervous. "Really? I just thought it might help everyone understand better if we work together instead of competing." "That's precisely the point," Dr. Palmer replied, her usual stern expression softening. "You've changed more than just test scores, Emily. You've changed the way these students approach learning itself." The truth of those words resonated through the rest of the school day. In the cafeteria, Emily's study group had grown so large, they'd had to push several tables together. Grace watched with pride as her best friend led discussions that ranged from basic chemistry concepts to advanced theoretical applications. "You should have seen her in Mr. Russell's physics class," Grace announced to the group. "She explained quantum mechanics so well, even I started to understand it." Emily blushed, but didn't deflect the praise as she once would have. Instead, she pulled out her notebook, filled with carefully annotated diagrams. "Speaking of quantum mechanics, I've been thinking about how we could visualize electron orbital shapes using some simple household materials." The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as Emily led an impromptu demonstration using Play-Doh and wire to create three-dimensional models of electron orbitals. Students from other tables began drifting over, drawn by the unusual sight of serious science being discussed with such enthusiasm during lunch period. "Miss Chen," a quiet voice interrupted the discussion. Emily looked up to find Jessica Martinez, a sixth grader she barely knew, standing nervously at the edge of the group. "I heard you're good at explaining things. Could you maybe help me with my science homework sometime?" Emily smiled warmly, remembering her own days of hiding her knowledge. "Of course! Why don't you join us? We're just getting started on quantum mechanics, but we can review your material too." Jessica's face lit up as she pulled up a chair, and Emily noticed something familiar in the younger girl's eager expression. The same hunger for knowledge she had once kept hidden. Around the table, other students shifted to make room, the circle of learning expanding naturally to include one more. As the school day drew to a close, Emily found herself in the advanced laboratory, preparing for her research project under Dr. Palmer's supervision. The sophisticated equipment no longer intimidated her. Instead, it represented possibilities she was finally ready to explore. "Your proposal for studying novel catalytic pathways is ambitious," Dr. Palmer commented, reviewing Emily's preliminary notes. "But I think you're ready for the challenge. Have you considered presenting your findings at the State Science Symposium?" Emily carefully adjusted the settings on a spectrometer, her movements precise and confident. "Actually, I was hoping to collaborate with some other students. Ryan has some interesting ideas about computational modeling, and Sarah's been researching similar reactions in biological systems." Dr. Palmer raised an eyebrow, impressed by the initiative. "A cross-disciplinary approach? That's quite sophisticated for students your age." "Well," Emily replied, a hint of mischief in her smile, "you did say we shouldn't be limited by others' expectations." The older woman chuckled, shaking her head in amazement. "Using my own words against me. You really have come into your own, haven't you?" As they worked, Emily reflected on the changes the past weeks had brought. The advanced lab, once a forbidden territory, now felt like a second home. The complex equations that had once been her secret companions were now topics of enthusiastic group discussions. Even Dr. Palmer, whose approval had once seemed impossibly distant, was now more mentor than adversary. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the laboratory windows. Emily carefully documented her experimental parameters, her notebook no longer a hiding place, but a chronicle of discovery. Tomorrow, she would share these findings with her study group, watching understanding dawn in their eyes as they grasped new concepts. Dr. Palmer finished reviewing Emily's research notes, her red pen barely touching the paper. "You know," she said thoughtfully, When I first started teaching, I had such grand ideas about inspiring students to love chemistry. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that inspiration goes both ways. Emily looked up from her notebook, struck by the honesty in her teacher's voice. Maybe that's what chemistry is really about, she suggested. Not just understanding how molecules interact, but how people do too. Dr. Palmer smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her usually stern features. Perhaps you should consider teaching someday, Miss Chen. You seem to have a natural talent for it. As Emily packed up her equipment for the day, she caught her reflection in the laboratory window. The quiet girl who had hidden in the back of the classroom was gone, replaced by someone who stood tall, who spoke with confidence, who helped others find their own path to understanding. Outside, the Boston skyline glowed in the evening light, a reminder of all the possibilities that lay ahead. Emily's phone buzzed with messages from study group members, sharing excitement about tomorrow's planned experiments and asking thoughtful questions about today's concepts. She typed quick responses, her fingers flying over the keys with the same confidence she now showed in the laboratory. Each message represented a connection, a bridge built between minds eager to learn and grow together. The security guard passing by the laboratory gave her a friendly wave. He had grown used to seeing her work late, pursuing her passion for science with an intensity that inspired others. "Another breakthrough today, Miss Chen," he called out. Emily smiled, gathering her belongings. "Every day is a breakthrough when you're not afraid to learn," she replied, surprised by the wisdom in her own words. As she walked through the quiet halls of Riverdale Academy, Emily passed the spot where, weeks ago, she had tried so hard to be invisible. Now, her footsteps echoed with purpose, each step carrying her further from the shadows of self-doubt and closer to the person she was meant to be. The setting sun painted the school buildings in shades of gold, a reminder that even the most ordinary days could hold extraordinary transformations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions to answer, new minds to inspire. But Emily, Chen was ready for them all, armed with knowledge, confidence, and the understanding that true education was about more than just having the right answers. It was about helping others find their own path to discovery. The autumn breeze rustled through the courtyard of Riverdale Academy as students gathered for the annual State Science Symposium. Banners celebrating academic excellence fluttered against the red brick buildings, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Inside the main auditorium, Emily Chen stood before her research poster, her heart racing not with fear, but with anticipation. The sophisticated molecular diagrams and reaction pathways she had meticulously prepared drew curious glances from university professors and industry professionals who had come to judge the competition. Her project on novel catalytic pathways had evolved far beyond its initial scope, incorporating computational modeling from Ryan and biological applications from Sarah into a comprehensive study that pushed the boundaries of 8th grade science. Dr. Palmer moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping occasionally to speak with colleagues and former students. When she reached Emily's station, her eyes sparkled with pride as she watched her young protégé confidently explain complex chemical concepts to a visiting MIT professor. "The electron transfer mechanism we observed," Emily was saying, pointing to a particularly detailed diagram, "suggested an unexpected intermediate state. We validated this using both spectroscopic analysis and computational modeling." Her voice carried the authority of someone who truly understood her subject matter. The MIT professor leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "This is remarkably sophisticated work for someone your age. Have you considered the implications for green chemistry applications?" Emily smiled, reaching for a supplementary data sheet she had prepared. "Actually, that's the focus of our next phase of research. We've identified several potential applications in sustainable catalyst design." Across the auditorium, Ryan and Sarah manned their own stations, their projects complementing Emily's research while standing strong on their own merits. The three had worked together seamlessly over the past months, each bringing their unique perspectives to create something greater than they could have achieved alone. Jessica Martinez, the sixth grader who had once nervously approached Emily for help, now proudly presented her own project in the junior division. Her work, while simpler in scope, showed the same passionate attention to detail that Emily had inspired in so many of her peers. As the morning progressed, more students filtered through the symposium. Emily noticed how they moved between the projects with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and engaging in sophisticated scientific discussions. Gone was the competitive tension that had once characterized academic events at Riverdale. In its place was a collaborative spirit of shared discovery. Grace appeared with a camera, documenting the event for the school newspaper. "Look at what you started," she whispered to Emily during a brief lull. "Remember when you used to hide your chemistry books under your regular textbooks?" Emily glanced around the auditorium, taking in the scene. Students who had once been rivals now worked together, building on each other's ideas. Dr. Palmer, who had once used her knowledge to intimidate, now moved through the crowd, offering encouragement and genuine praise to all participants. A commotion near the entrance drew their attention as Emily's parents arrived. Dr. James Chen carried a bouquet of flowers, while Michelle Chen clutched a camera, her eyes already glistening with pride. Behind them came a surprise. Emily's grandmother, who had flown in from California specifically for this event. Emily's grandmother made her way slowly through the crowd, her traditional Chinese dress standing out among the sea of business casual attire. When she reached Emily's station, she took her granddaughter's hands in hers, speaking softly in Mandarin. "Your mother told me how you found your voice," she said, "how you stopped hiding your light. This is what I dreamed of when I left China, that my family would have the freedom to shine." The moment was interrupted by an announcement over the speakers. The judges were ready to begin their final rounds. Emily straightened her poster, ensuring every element was perfect. The complex molecular structures and reaction pathways that had once been her secret companions now stood proudly, displayed for all to see. Dr. Palmer approached with the first panel of judges, her professional demeanor belying the excitement in her eyes. "Miss Chen," she said formally, "please present your findings." Emily took a deep breath, looking out at the gathered crowd. She saw Ryan giving her a thumbs up, Sarah nodding encouragingly, and Jessica watching with undisguised admiration. Her family stood together, representing generations of dreams and determination. And Dr. Palmer, the teacher who had once tried to humiliate her, now stood ready to support her moment of triumph. The presentation flowed naturally, each concept building upon the last with crystal clarity. Emily explained how their team had identified the novel reaction pathway, how they had used multiple analytical techniques to confirm their findings, and how their discovery could potentially impact real-world applications. The judges asked probing questions, but Emily answered each one with confidence, occasionally deferring to Ryan or Sarah for their specific contributions to the project. The collaborative nature of their work clearly impressed the panel, who made notes about the sophisticated integration of different scientific disciplines. As the judges moved on to the next presentation, Emily caught sight of Mr. Russell, the physics teacher, beaming from the back of the room. He had been instrumental in helping them access additional equipment for their experiments, believing in their abilities even when their goals seemed ambitious. The afternoon continued with a steady stream of visitors to their project stations. Emily noticed how younger students lingered at her poster, asking questions not just about the science, but about how she had found the courage to pursue such advanced research. Each time, she encouraged them to embrace their own interests, to never let fear of standing out hold them back. During a quiet moment, Dr. Palmer drew Emily aside. "The department chair from Harvard's chemistry department is here," she said quietly. "He's expressed interest in having you participate in their summer research program for gifted students." Emily's eyes widened at the opportunity, but her first thought wasn't of personal glory. "Could other students apply too?" she asked. "Ryan's computational models are really innovative, and Sarah's biological applications could open up new research directions." Dr. Palmer's expression softened with understanding. "You really have transformed more than just yourself, haven't you? Yes, I think we could arrange for a team application. Your collaborative approach has certainly proved successful so far." The announcement of awards was scheduled for the end of the day. As students and judges gathered in the main auditorium, Emily sat between her grandmother and Grace, holding hands with both. The anticipation in the room was electric as the head judge approached the podium. The Junior Division Awards came first, and Emily cheered loudly when Jessica received an honorable mention for her project. The young girl's face glowed with pride as she accepted her certificate, shooting a grateful look toward Emily. When they reached the Senior Division, the judge's voice took on a note of special significance. "This year," he announced, "we witnessed something extraordinary. A group of 8th grade students not only produced research worthy of high school seniors, but they demonstrated the power of collaborative science at its finest." Emily squeezed Grace's hand tighter as the judge continued. "Their work on novel, catalytic pathways combining theoretical chemistry, computational modeling, and biological applications represents the kind of interdisciplinary approach we need in modern science. Therefore, the first place award for outstanding research goes to Emily Chen, Ryan Cooper, and Sarah Williams." The applause was thunderous as Emily and her teammates made their way to the stage. Dr. Palmer stood at the edge of the crowd, tears glistening in her eyes as she watched her students accept their award. The same teacher who had once tried to use knowledge as a weapon now celebrated its power to unite and inspire. Emily's grandmother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as she watched her granddaughter accept the golden trophy. Michelle Chen filmed every moment, while Dr. James Chen stood tall, his pride evident in his bearing. Their family's journey from quiet sacrifice to public triumph was embodied in this moment. After the ceremony, as students and families mingled, in the courtyard enjoying refreshments, Emily found herself surrounded by younger students seeking advice and encouragement. She remembered her own days of hiding in the back of the classroom and made sure to give each question her full attention. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as the symposium drew to a close. Emily stood with her family and friends, their achievement trophy glinting in the fading light. Dr. Palmer approached one last time, carrying a small package wrapped in silver paper. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Emily. "Something to remind you of how far you've come." Emily carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a leather-bound journal, similar to the one Dr. Palmer had shown her from her own graduate school days. Inside the cover was an inscription: "To Emily, never stop questioning, never stop sharing, never stop shining. Your journey is just beginning." The words brought tears to Emily's eyes as she remembered that pivotal day in class when everything had changed. She looked up at her teacher, seeing not the intimidating figure of the past, but a mentor who had helped her find her way. "Thank you," Emily said softly, meaning it for so much more than just the gift. Dr. Palmer nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further words. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Emily looked around at the gathered crowd, her family, her friends, her teammates, and all the students who had found their own courage through her example. The complex equations and molecular Structures that had once been her secret companions were now a bridge to connection, understanding, and growth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new opportunities to share knowledge. But Emily Chen was ready for them all, standing tall in the light of her own achievement, surrounded by the community she had helped to build. The quiet girl who had hidden in the back of the classroom was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true intelligence wasn't about having all the answers. It was about helping others find their own path to discovery. Spring. Sunshine streamed through the windows of Riverdale Academy's Grand Assembly Hall, where hundreds of students gathered for a special presentation. On stage, Emily Chen adjusted the microphone, her poise and confidence a stark contrast to her former shy demeanor. Behind her, a large screen displayed complex molecular structures, while Dr. Palmer sat in the front row, beaming with unmistakable pride. "When I first discovered my passion for chemistry," Emily began, her voice clear and strong, "I thought I had to hide it. I was afraid that being different, being smart, would make me a target." She paused, letting her words resonate through the hushed auditorium. "But I was wrong. Being yourself isn't just about having courage. It's about inspiring others to find their own strength." The packed hall included not just Riverdale students, but visitors from other schools across Boston. News of the transformation at Riverdale had spread, drawing attention from educators and administrators eager to understand how one quiet student had catalyzed such dramatic change. Principal Thompson sat in the front row beside Dr. Palmer, nodding in approval as Emily continued her speech. The school's academic performance had soared in recent months, but more importantly, the culture had shifted. Competition had given way to collaboration, fear to curiosity. "Science isn't just about memorizing facts or earning perfect grades," Emily continued, clicking to the next slide. "It's about asking questions, working together, and never being afraid to dive deeper into what fascinates you." The screen showed photos of study groups in the library, students working together in laboratories, and younger students being mentored by their peers. In the audience, Jessica Martinez sat straighter, remembering how Emily's encouragement had helped her find her own voice. Next to her, Ryan Cooper and Sarah Williams exchanged knowing looks. They had witnessed firsthand how sharing knowledge could multiply its power. Dr. Palmer watched her former adversary, now her proudest success story, with a mixture of admiration and humility. The teacher's own approach to education had undergone a profound transformation, inspiring her colleagues to reconsider their methods as well. "Last week," Emily shared, her eyes bright with excitement, "our collaborative research team received confirmation that our paper on novel catalytic pathways will be published in the Young Scientist Journal. But what makes me proudest isn't the publication. It's that we did it together." A ripple of applause spread through the audience. Publishing in a peer-reviewed journal was almost unheard of for middle school students, but Emily and her team had achieved it through their unique combination of skills and perspectives. Grace Martinez, sitting with the school newspaper team, snapped photos while wiping away proud tears. She had documented every step of this journey, watching her best friend evolve from a wallflower into an inspiration for hundreds of students. As Emily concluded her speech, the assembly hall erupted in enthusiastic applause. Students from other schools leaned forward, eager to ask questions about starting similar programs in their own communities. The energy in the room was electric, charged with the possibility of change. Principal Thompson took the stage next, announcing the creation of the Chen Palmer Initiative for Collaborative Learning, a new program that would provide resources and support for student-led study groups across all subjects. The name acknowledged both the student who sparked the change and the teacher who had the wisdom to nurture it. After the assembly, as students filed out discussing ideas for their own study groups, Emily found herself surrounded by young faces eager to share their stories. A seventh-grade girl showed her a physics notebook filled with careful annotations. A 10th-grade boy described how he'd started tutoring younger students in mathematics. Dr. Palmer approached, carrying a stack of letters. "These came for you," she said, her voice warm with pride. "Harvard, MIT, and Stanford are all interested in having you speak at their summer science programs. But they don't just want you. They want to learn about the collaborative model you've developed." Emily accepted the letters, her mind already racing with possibilities. "What if we organized a conference?" she suggested, "not just for top students, but for anyone who wants to learn how to learn better together." Dr. Palmer's eyes lit up at the idea. "I think you might be onto something there, Miss Chen." Again. She glanced around the emptying assembly hall. "You know, when I first became a teacher, I thought my job was to identify the brightest students and push them to excel. You taught me that true education is about lighting fires, not filling vessels." Outside the assembly hall, spring had painted the Riverdale campus in vibrant colors. Emily watched as groups of students scattered across the lawn, their animated discussions carrying on the breeze. Some gathered around textbooks, others gestured excitedly about concepts they were learning to love. Her parents waited near the entrance, her father's research colleagues from Massachusetts General Hospital beside them. They had come to discuss expanding the collaborative learning model into their medical research programs, inspired by the success they'd witnessed at Riverdale. Emily's grandmother, who had extended her stay in Boston indefinitely, stood among them wearing a traditional kippah decorated with chemical structures, a special gift she'd had made to celebrate Emily's achievements. Her presence was a constant reminder of how education could transform not just individuals, but entire families and communities. As Emily approached her family, she overheard snippets of excited conversation about future possibilities. The hospital researchers were discussing internship programs. Her father was sketching ideas for expanding the home laboratory, and her mother was coordinating with other parents about hosting science workshops for younger students. The breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms as Emily paused to look back at the school building. Through the windows, she could see Dr. Palmer in her classroom, already meeting with another group of students eager to explore the depths of chemistry. The teacher caught her eye and gave a small wave, their shared journey reflected in the simple gesture. Grace rushed up, waving her camera. "The newspaper layout is almost done," she announced. "We're featuring stories from students about how the study groups have changed their experience at school. You won't believe some of their quotes." Emily smiled, remembering her own transformation. "Maybe we should start a regular column," she suggested. "Not just about academic achievements, but about students helping each other grow." The idea sparked immediate enthusiasm from Grace, who began outlining possible features. Their conversation was interrupted by Jessica, who approached, with a group of sixth graders in tow. "They have questions about starting a science club for elementary school students," Jessica explained, her own confidence now matching Emily's. "I told them you'd be the perfect person to ask." As Emily listened to the younger students' ideas, she felt the familiar thrill of possibility. Each question, each spark of interest, represented another chance to spread the joy of learning. The fear of standing out that had once consumed her now seemed as distant as the chemical equations she'd hidden in her notebook margins. Dr. Palmer emerged from the building, her arms full of laboratory manuals. "Miss Chen," she called out, "the university committee would like to meet next week about expanding the summer program. They're particularly interested in your ideas about peer mentoring." Emily nodded, already making mental notes about how to structure the program to benefit students at all levels. The complex molecular models that had once been her private passion were now building blocks for something much larger. a community where intelligence was celebrated, curiosity was encouraged, and no one had to hide their light. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the campus, Emily watched her growing circle of friends and supporters discuss plans for the future. The quiet girl who had once tried to disappear into the background had become a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes the most powerful reactions begin with a single brave moment. The cherry blossoms continued to fall, coating the ground in a carpet of pink petals. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to share knowledge, and new chances to help others find their voice. But for now, Emily Chen stood in the warm spring sunshine, surrounded by the proof that one person's courage could transform an entire community. Her grandmother approached, taking her hand gently. "You see," she said softly in Mandarin, "sometimes the greatest gift we can give others is permission to be themselves." Emily squeezed her grandmother's hand, understanding flowing between them like an electric current. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, as the last students drifted away from the assembly hall. Each carried with them a piece of the transformation that had begun with one quiet girl finding her voice, one teacher learning to see beyond her assumptions, and one school discovering that education was about more than just having the right answers. A warm summer evening wrapped around Riverdale Academy's grand auditorium as graduating seniors filed in for a special recognition ceremony. Among the distinguished guests sat Emily Chen, now preparing to enter her freshman year of high school, yet already an honored speaker for the evening. The setting sun painted the windows in hues of gold, much like the medals adorning the students' formal attire. Dr. Palmer stood at the podium, her presence now inspiring rather than intimidating. "When we speak of legacy," she began, her voice carrying through the hushed auditorium, "we often think of grand gestures and monumental achievements. But sometimes, the most profound changes begin with a single moment of courage, a decision to step into the light rather than remain in the shadows." The audience sat captivated as she continued, her words weaving together the story of transformation that had swept through Riverdale Academy. Parents, teachers, and students from across the state had gathered to witness not just a graduation, but the celebration of a movement that had begun in room 405 and rippled outward like waves from a stone cast into still water. Emily watched from her seat as Dr. Palmer described the Chen Palmer Initiative's success in revolutionizing science education across Boston. What had started as a simple study group had blossomed into a comprehensive program adopted by schools throughout the state. The collaborative learning model they'd developed had caught the attention of educational researchers nationwide. In the front row, Emily's grandmother sat proudly beside her parents, wearing a new qipao embroidered with the molecular structure of serotonin, the happiness molecule, she'd explained with a wink. Dr. James Chen held his wife's hand tightly as they listened to the stories of lives touched by their daughter's courage. Grace Martinez, now editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, sat nearby with her camera ready to capture every moment. The publication had gained recognition for its coverage of educational innovation, featuring regular columns about student achievements and collaborative learning successes. As Dr. Palmer concluded her speech, she gestured toward Emily. "And now, I'd like to invite the catalyst of this transformation to share her thoughts. Emily Chen, would you please join me?" Emily rose gracefully, her confidence now as natural as breathing. As she approached the podium, she caught sight of familiar faces in the audience, Ryan Cooper and Sarah Williams, their research now published in multiple journals. Jessica Martinez, who had started a flourishing mentorship program for elementary school students, and countless others whose lives had been touched by the changes at Riverdale. "A year ago," Emily began, her voice clear and strong, I believed that being smart meant being alone. I thought the safest path was to hide my passion for learning, to blend into the background. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the auditorium. I couldn't have been more wrong. The audience listened intently as Emily described the journey from fear to empowerment, from isolation to community. She spoke of late nights in the laboratory, of breakthrough moments shared with classmates, of the joy in watching others discover their own potential. But this story isn't really about me, she continued, gesturing to the gathered crowd. It's about every student who found the courage to ask questions. Every teacher who learned to listen differently, every person who discovered that knowledge grows stronger when it's shared. In the back of the auditorium, educators from other schools took notes, eager to implement similar programs in their own institutions. The Chen initiative had already been adopted by dozens of schools, each adding their own unique elements while maintaining the core principle of collaborative learning. Dr. Palmer returned to the podium, standing beside Emily as she announced the expansion of their program to include a summer science academy. Thanks to generous funding from several universities and research institutions, she revealed, we'll be able to offer this opportunity to students from all backgrounds, ensuring that no passionate mind is left behind due to financial constraints. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, particularly from a group of students who had traveled from underserved schools to attend the ceremony. Emily's insistence on accessibility had been a cornerstone of the program's development, inspired by her grandmother's stories of limited educational opportunities. As the ceremony continued, awards were presented to students who had exemplified the spirit of collaborative learning. Jessica Martinez accepted recognition for her work with elementary school students, her voice steady as she described how Emily's mentorship had shown her the power of passing knowledge forward. Ryan Cooper and Sarah Williams were honored for their groundbreaking research now being studied by university laboratories. Their work had proven that high school students, when given proper support and encouragement, could contribute meaningfully to scientific advancement. Grace Martinez received special recognition for her role in documenting and spreading awareness of the educational transformation. Her articles had helped other schools understand and implement similar programs, creating a network of institutions committed to collaborative learning. As the formal presentations concluded, Emily returned to the podium for a final announcement. Today marks not just a celebration of what we've achieved, she said, her excitement barely contained, but the beginning of something even bigger. Starting next semester, the Chen Initiative will be partnering with major research institutions to create opportunities for student involvement in real-world scientific research. The news sent a buzz of excitement through the audience. Emily continued, outlining how the partnership would allow students to contribute to ongoing research projects while learning from experienced scientists. The program would break down traditional barriers between secondary education and professional research. Dr. Palmer watched her former student with undisguised pride, remembering the quiet girl who had once hidden in the back of her classroom. The transformation wasn't just in Emily's confidence or achievements, it was in the way she had helped create a community where excellence and collaboration went hand in hand. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled in the reception hall, Emily found herself surrounded by educators eager to learn more about implementing similar programs in their schools. She answered questions with patience and enthusiasm, remembering her own journey from silence to leadership. Her grandmother approached, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "In China," she said softly in Mandarin, "we have a saying, a single spark can start a prairie fire. You, my dear granddaughter, have started something that will burn bright for generations to come." Emily hugged her grandmother tightly, understanding the weight of those words. The changes at Riverdale Academy weren't just about improving test scores or winning competitions. They were about transforming the very nature of education, about creating spaces where everyone could shine. As the evening drew to a close, Emily stood with Dr. Palmer near the window, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Did you ever imagine," her former teacher asked, "that one moment of courage could lead to all of this?" Emily smiled, thinking of all the lives touched, all the barriers broken, all the potential unleashed. "Maybe that's the most important lesson," she replied, "that every great change begins with a single step, a decision to be who you truly are." Dr. Palmer nodded, understanding flowing between them. They had both been transformed by their shared journey, teacher and student, each learning from the other, growing together in unexpected ways. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. The Chen Palmer initiative would continue to grow, touching more lives, breaking down more barriers, creating more opportunities for students to discover their potential. But more importantly, it had shown that education was about more than just passing tests or earning grades. It was about building connections, fostering understanding, and helping others find their voice. As the last guests departed, Emily took a final look around the auditorium where her journey had begun. The quiet girl who had once hidden her light was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true intelligence wasn't just about having knowledge. It was about using that knowledge to lift others up, to create spaces where everyone could grow and learn together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to share knowledge, new chances to help others find their strength. But Emily Chen was ready for them all, standing tall in the light of her achievements, surrounded by the community she had helped to build. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.